In the small mill town of Alcolu, South Carolina, in the spring of 1944, life moved quietly under the shadows of war and segregation. It was a time when America was fighting for freedom abroad, yet the Deep South still clung to its chains of racial prejudice. Children played near the railroad tracks, men worked long days in the mills, and families kept mostly to their own kind, white families on one side of the tracks, black families on the other. It was in this divided town that one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in American legal history began to unfold, the story of George Stinney Jr., a 14-year-old boy who would become the youngest person executed in the United States in the 20th century. On March 23, 1944, two young white girls, Betty June Binnicker, age 11, and Mary Emma Thames, age 7, set out on their bicycles searching for wildflowers. They rode through the small town, chatting with people as they passed, and at one point, they approached a small house where a young black boy and his sister stood outside. The girls asked if they knew where to find maypops, a type of wildflower. That boy was George Stinney Jr. It was an innocent conversation that would become the center of a nightmare. Later that day, when the girls didn't return home, panic spread through the town. A search party was organized, mostly white men with dogs and flashlights combing through the woods and fields. The next morning, their bodies were found in a ditch near a railroad embankment. Both girls had been brutally attacked, one had a deep wound on her head, and the other had been hit multiple times with a blunt object. Their bicycles were found nearby. The discovery shocked the town, and within hours, suspicion turned toward the black side of Alcolu. The local police didn't take long to decide who they believed was responsible. Within hours, George Stinney Jr., just a 14-year-old 7th grader, and his older brother were taken into custody. George's brother was later released, but George was held alone. There were no witnesses, no physical evidence, and no forensic proof linking him to the crime, just fear, prejudice, and the word of a few white townspeople. The officers claimed that George had confessed to the killings after being interrogated alone, without his parents, without a lawyer, and without any official record of the confession. In reality, George's family was forced to flee the town that very night, fearing mob violence and lynching. His parents never got to see their son again before his trial. The trial of George Stinney Jr. began on April 24, 1944, just 1 month after the murders. The entire process lasted only 1 day. The courthouse in Clarendon County was packed with white townspeople, curious onlookers, and local reporters. George sat quietly in the courtroom, barely tall enough for his head to peek above the table. His court-appointed defense attorney was a tax lawyer who had never tried a criminal case before. He called no witnesses, did not challenge the prosecution's evidence, and barely spoke in George's defense. The all-white, all-male jury deliberated for just 10 minutes before finding him guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence was death by electric chair. There was no appeal, no second chance, and no time to prepare for mercy. George's execution was scheduled for June 16, 1944, only 83 days after his arrest. The state made no attempt to delay or review the case. The boy was kept in an adult prison, isolated from his family, and left to face his fate in silence. At 14, George was 5 feet tall and weighed barely 95 pounds. When the day of execution came, he was led to the electric chair in Columbia, South Carolina. Witnesses described the moment as both horrifying and unforgettable. The straps were too large for his small body, so guards used a Bible as a booster seat. The oversized mask slipped off during the execution, exposing his tear-streaked face as the electricity surged through his body. He was declared dead minutes later. Outside the prison, the world went on, but for decades, the truth of what really happened remained buried. Years passed, and George's case faded from public memory, surviving only in whispers and old newspaper clippings. But in the early 2000s, researchers, civil rights lawyers, and journalists began to re-examine the case. They uncovered what many long suspected, that the so-called confession was fabricated, the trial was rushed, and the evidence was non-existent. Surviving members of George's family came forward, describing how they were driven from town by threats and how George had never even been near the area where the girls were found. His sister Amy, who had spoken to him that day, said they were together tending to the family's cow when the girls rode past, a crucial alibi that no one at the trial ever heard. Historians noted that the original police records had vanished, the murder weapon was never recovered, and there was no physical evidence linking George to the scene. The entire prosecution rested on an alleged verbal confession that no one else ever heard, no written record of which existed. It was a textbook example of a Jim Crow-era injustice, a black child condemned by the color of his skin, not the evidence of his guilt. Legal scholars compared the case to a public lynching disguised as justice. In 2014, 70 years after George's death, a South Carolina judge, Carmen Mullen, reviewed the case in a historic hearing. New witnesses, family members, and historians testified that George had been wrongfully convicted. The judge concluded that the boy's constitutional rights had been violated beyond repair. She vacated the conviction, declaring the 1944 trial a fundamental injustice. For the first time, George's name was cleared. His surviving relatives wept in the courtroom, holding photographs of the small boy who had been lost to time. The ruling didn't bring him back, but it restored a measure of dignity to a life stolen far too soon. Today, George Stinney Jr.'s story is taught in law schools and civil rights classes as a symbol of racial injustice and judicial failure. His case stands as a reminder of how dangerous prejudice can be when mixed with power and fear. In Alcolu, a memorial now stands near the site of his arrest, a simple wooden cross with his name carved into it. Locals sometimes leave flowers there, and every year, visitors from around the world come to pay their respects. The town that once turned its back on him now speaks his name with a quiet kind of sorrow. What makes this story so powerful isn't only the injustice itself, but what it represents. A child was condemned not because of what he did, but because of who he was. In the South of the 1940s, a black boy's word carried no weight against that of a white town. The law was supposed to protect everyone equally, yet it became a weapon against the innocent. George's story forces us to look deeper, to ask how many other voices were silenced, how many other names forgotten, and how easily justice can be corrupted when society allows fear and hatred to dictate truth. In the years since, George Stinney Jr. has become more than a historical figure. His face, youthful and solemn, appears in documentaries, art, and protest murals. His name is invoked whenever conversations turn to wrongful convictions and juvenile justice. He was just a boy, a child who loved his family, tended cows, and dreamed simple dreams, yet he was forced to bear the weight of an entire nation's prejudice. The courtroom may have silenced him in 1944, but history eventually gave him back his voice. If there's anything to learn from George's story, it's that justice is not only about verdicts, it's about humanity. It's about how we treat the powerless, how we listen to those who cannot defend themselves, and how we ensure that what happened to him never happens again. The image of that small boy in an oversized electric chair still lingers, a painful reminder that truth delayed is truth denied, and that even after decades, the truth still matters. George Stinney Jr.'s story is not just about a wrongful conviction, it's about the moral cost of silence. It's about the weight of history and the hope that one day, society will measure justice not by the color of a child's skin, but by the content of his heart.